Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar. Is your business prepared? Disaster Readiness and Risk Management with Aaron Roy and Adam Risman. Before we get started, I'd like to give a special thanks to our small business series underwriter, Needham Bank, and our series supporters, CMIT Solutions, InSource Services, and William James College for helping create programs like this possible. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think we're all excited to know how to prepare for disasters, especially with the weather we've been having. So further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Maxim. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on your lunch break on this Wednesday afternoon in July. I do appreciate it. And thank you to the Chamber for the opportunity to do this webinar. I do think it's quite fitting. There's a lot going on with the weather and disasters and insurance and buildings and properties. So I'm sure there are questions out there. So I'm hoping to shed a little bit of light on the disaster side of what can happen and why you should be prepared and why that matters. And then Adam can speak to the insurance and risk management side of things. So I will start us off. Can everybody see that? Perfect. Thank you. All right. So who am I? I'm Aaron Roy. I'm the sales and marketing manager for 4 SERVPRO franchises. But we cover this area, and I'm obviously a part of the chamber. So why would you take advice from me about disasters? Well, I work for SERVPRO, which is the #1 brand in property damage restoration. It was founded in 1967. It has been a franchise system since the 80s. We're an IICRC certified firm, which means there's an independent body that we go to that tells us exactly what to do with fire, flood, mold, sewage, biohazard, all that stuff. So there is quite literally a book that we follow and insurance carriers follow to make sure everything done is correctly. So if you ever hire a restoration company, if it's not me, please make sure they are IICRC certified. I've heard horror stories of people who are not, and they don't know what they're doing, and they can make things a lot worse. As I mentioned, we are a franchise system. Our franchises in particular have been around for a very long time. The original was in 1984 of Lexington, Bedford by the current owner's parents. The 2 sons worked for them, so they know SERVPRO from the ground up. And then in 2014, they took over. They bought their second franchise. And then 2 years ago, we bought our third, and this year we just bought our fourth. So we are actively growing and expanding, and there are decades of restoration experience in these franchises. So I just wanted to let you guys know a little bit about us so you can know who is giving you this information and that we're credible. And now I'd like to introduce Adam.
Thank you, Aaron. So my name is Adam Risman. I'm with Risman Insurance Agencies. We're a family agency based out of Medford, and we have a few locations around Massachusetts. So we're a property casualty firm. That's what we specialize in. Do a lot of real estate on both the personal and commercial side. Do a lot of contractors on the business side. A lot of retail, a lot of local businesses, Main Street America. And then we do a lot on the personal line side as well. We're about 50-50 from personal and commercial. We were founded in 1925, so we're excited to have our 100th anniversary next year. We've done about 18 acquisitions in the last little over 20 years. So that's how we mainly grow. We pick up local agencies and really just bring them into the family and try to be as effective as possible in that way. We are a 5-star agency. We go through a pretty rigorous testing every few years, and we were actually the 7th in the state to run through that. So we actually just did this a few months ago. Everyone gets interviewed throughout our firm, and it's really a piece of pride for us that we want to keep up for as many years as possible. We have about 50 employees locally, and we use about 40 plus local and national insurance carriers just to make sure we have the reach to get through, both the easy times in insurance and times like this where it's a lot harder to place risks and really get the service and representation you need. So that's a little bit about us.
Awesome, thank you. So a little bit of agenda for today. We're not going to keep you too long, don't worry. I am going to give you all some examples of what could happen to your business and the effects it has, and why it's important to be prepared. And Adam's going to chime in on the insurance risk management side of things as we go through. And then at the end, we'll talk about coverage and emergency planning. And obviously Q&A at the end. If you have questions, jot them down. Happy to answer them at the end. So the first example is, I don't know if anybody remembers the Cafe Nero fire at Assembly Row that happened 2 or 3 summers ago. It was pretty high profile. It was on the news. We did end up getting that job. So our franchise serviced that. We do cover Somerville as one of our territories. So fire, that's one of the big risks that can happen at a property. Unfortunately, it does happen. But having the right things in place can very much minimize your business interruption. And obviously, you don't want to cause harm to anybody. So when I talk about emergency planning, most businesses have a plan in place for the people, which makes a lot of sense, but they don't have a plan for the building. And a place like Cafe Nero is a great example of, if you're not open, you're not generating revenue. So the less time that you're closed following a disaster, the better. So this is where the emergency planning comes in. You got to have a plan in place so that you can get back up and running sooner. And while you're not running, that is when the insurance portion of thing comes in to make sure you can bridge that gap. So what happened at Cafe Nero, this was the cause of loss. And a loss means a fire, flood, or mold. It's basically when you file an insurance claim, that's called a loss. This is the air handler that was on top of Cafe Nero that obviously caught fire and completely melted down. And there were 4 investigations going on. That's what this evidence tape is right here. We couldn't clean this because the Somerville Fire Department was doing an investigation. The property manager for Assembly Row had an investigation, Cafe Nero had an investigation, and then the installer of the air handler itself had an investigation. So these are all 4 different insurance carriers that all have different policies for this property, and they needed to figure out who caused it and who ultimately is liable. Which that doesn't really fall into my world. I was just told, don't touch that. It's very important to an investigation. Clean everything else around it. Do you want to weigh in on anything yet, Adam, or wait?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I could add there is just having for additional insureds, when you have contractors come in, when you have other parties involved in a property that may lead to loss, obviously, having policies tied together, adding an additional insured, or at least getting certificates of insurance really just kind of alleviates some of the pressures of for insurance companies showing up and trying to figure out a way essentially to not pay for it and point fingers and say, it was the installer's fault. It was the manufacturer's fault. When you have all of them kind of tied together in the beginning, it alleviates a lot of that pressure kind of on the end. And just to kind of go off of kind of what causes fire as well. So essentially you have equipment breakdown, which means if there's a loss covered or loss caused by equipment being damaged, mechanical, electrical, AC, refrigeration, anything like that, that's on policies and you get specific coverage for obviously replacing that equipment and then obviously the damage it does to the building. So having that added to your policy, which is very inexpensive or in some case already included, is really something important to look to.
Awesome. So this is behind that air handler, and this is a fire door, which this is a really good example of a great fire door and wall working, right? So this air handler caught fire on the roof, but the fire didn't go into the building because of this door. The door on the picture on the left is the outside. Obviously, you can see some char. And then on the inside is the inside of the property, which is basically untouched except for soot and smoke damage, which obviously will sort of billow everywhere. So having the proper fire code, fire door, and fire regulations at your property, super, super important, and probably saved this building from burning down to the ground and kept it contained on the roof. So that's definitely one thing you want to be thinking about at your property. Do you want to speak to that, Adam?
No, I mean, I think just preparation is huge, and having people like Aaron on call when something does happen is obviously is very beneficial in times like this. But yeah, having constant inspections of your property and really just walking through yourself every year, making sure you're up to code and you have the piece in place to really protect yourself if something does happen. Because this door obviously prevented a ton more damage and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars it saves.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little bit of our work. This is what happens when you have a loss, right? So this is all drying equipment in here, and that's because the fire department did what it does best, and it poured hundreds of gallons of water on top of this building, which all rained down inside of it. So when that happens, we need to set up drying equipment, which you'll see here, fans. There's wood floor drying mats trying to save that wooden floor that's in all Cafe Neros. And we have air filtration devices to clean the air. We have a hydroxyl generator in there, which is also breaking down odor molecules because that smoke and soot smell. Just like your clothes would smell after a campfire, same thing with a house fire, but a lot more intense. So the cleaning and deodorization is a big part of it. The interesting thing about the water side of this is that we asked Cafe Nero if they wanted us to tarp their roof because there was a big hole in it, and they said the property manager would handle it. The property manager didn't, and 3 days later it rained and flooded this place. So we had to re-dry it a second time after drying it once. So I think a takeaway there is having very clear communication between the building owner, property manager, lease, tenant, and making sure if something happens, you do have a plan. Clearly, these people either had a miscommunication or there wasn't really a plan to tarp it. So I'm not saying you have to listen to me when I say to do it, but the key takeaway is make sure you think about these things ahead of time because in the moment, stuff like a tarp on the roof gets lost in translation pretty easily when you're dealing with a store with no revenue, a fire, flooding. So the tarp got lost, and it's because they didn't think about it, they didn't have a plan. I don't know. But again, the takeaway here is being prepared ultimately.
Yeah. And Aaron, I'll just jump in here for a minute as well. So, as an insured, if you are Cafe Nero in this case, or just a building owner in general, you do have duties after a loss as an insured. So, as you just spoke about, obviously there was a big hole in the ceiling, whether it was easy to access or not for them and easy to cover up, you do have a duty as an insured to both notify either local authorities if need be for fire, any emergency services, to notify your insurance agent like myself or the insurance carrier, which we can do for you. Keeping the property both damaged and undamaged safe. So in this case, if they didn't try to prevent further loss with a hole in their ceiling, and 3 days later it flooded, an insurance carrier, whether they do or don't, and I don't know in this case what they did, they could have grounds to not cover further damage if it reflooded and they did not have a chance or put in the appropriate effort to keep the property safe. That could be on the insured.
Yeah, great point. So this is a little bit more of the mitigation work. They have really tall ceilings there, so we had to get a scissor lift because we have to physically hand wipe everything down that has soot on it, or that smell will never go away. And it's also just kind of gross if you run your hand across something with soot, it'll come off. So the really challenging part was this big cage that they have around their light on the right hand side. That had to be hand done. There's no way to do it otherwise. So that took us days just to do that chandelier. But all of that, I don't know if you call it chandelier or cage, but all of that is covered by insurance. It's all a result of the loss. But the thing I'm stressing here is the time, right? Things like that in a property you wouldn't think about. But then when you have a fire and you have smoke and soot damage all over it, and you realize that's going to take a person multiple days to clean. So their downtime, right? Their business interruption, their loss of revenue, they do not make money if they're not open. So I really hope that they had the right coverage and they were able to bridge the gap. Obviously, it's a big company, so if they lost some revenue, they'd be fine. But if you're a smaller brick and mortar place and you expect to be down for 10 days and you don't have the right insurance in place, then I come and say it's really going to be longer because you have some facets of your property that we didn't anticipate. So again, having those things in mind before something happens is great for emergency planning, and then also having the right coverage in place in case something happens, you are covered.
Yep. And just going on that for a minute, Aaron,
Yep.
updating every year, it's not everyone's favorite thing to do, but updating all the numbers you possibly can. I know it's not realistic to do every single one every year, but having the general, having your building up to date when it comes to the property value. If you're underinsured by 25%, you have a full loss. Unfortunately, you're out of luck. Same thing with betterments and improvements as well as your equipment. So when Cafe Nero built out this location, how much money did they put into the building on top of the cost of purchasing it? What equipment do they have? Tables, kitchen equipment, anything like that? That has to be listed separately and it's treated separately. If you don't update those amounts, and you might double it over year to year and you don't cover it, unfortunately, in a loss, you're only going to get up to your policy limits. And on the same thing, obviously, Cafe Nero is not serving coffee during this. So if they're closed for a month and they have the right amount of business income coverage, they're going to get covered for that income they're losing. But if you don't update it and your revenue doubles year over year, you're only going to get half of what you deserve. So it's really important to assess that every year.
Yeah, great point. So now the next case study is flooding, which is very pertinent this time of year. July, for the past 3 years has been incredible with the amount of rainfall. I've been at SERVPRO for 3.5, and every July it's insane, especially in the Needham area. So, flooding is pretty pervasive nowadays with the weather. This is Dunelin Supermarket in Lincoln, I believe. And this was not a flood due to weather, but a flood due to a broken sprinkler pipe in their utility room, which this is the utility room here. Sorry for the pictures you're taken in the middle of the night when they called us. So basically, the pipe for their sprinklers let go and flooded this utility room. This is half pumped out from the right here when we're pumping out at, what is it, about 9 o'clock at night. This is half. This room was under 10 feet of water. So it was completely submerged. We couldn't get in there. We had to pump it out and then walk on furniture that we set up on the floor to get from place to place initially until we got all the water out. But the really interesting thing about this job is this room is not very big, so the water damage itself wasn't a problem. The problem was that's where all their electrical equipment was. And this is a supermarket, remember? So they had 10 circuit breakers down there, 10 panels that all powered all their refrigeration and the freezers for all of the food. So you're in a supermarket, you lose power, that's a big problem. And I'll let Adam speak to the insurance side of things, but we were talking to the insurance company. They were trying to figure out, do we bring up freezer trucks and store them in the parking lot until we get this place back up and running? Or do we pay them for all the loss of food produce? We ultimately did not bring in a freezer truck. They didn't think that made sense. But what did have to happen as well is all of those panels were out of code. They were old and outdated. And if you have the right insurance policy, then code upgrades should come standard. So getting out the water was the easy part. It was doing the electrical that was the hard part. So we used Wheaton Electric out of Waltham. They're fantastic. They're one of our subcontractors. They were there all night that night, throughout the night and next 3 days to try and get this place back up and running as soon as possible, save any food that they could, etc. And the other interesting layer to this is if you can see the timestamp, this was in January. So it happened right before a cold snap. So their power was out, so they didn't have heat. So then there was the concern of, are all the pipes going to burst and flood the entire grocery store? So we were able to bring in temporary heat for them and save their pipes from getting burst while Wheaton Electric did their job and got everything back up and running. So again, you don't think about these things until they happen. And in the heat of the moment, when you're going through this, you don't want to be thinking, what do I do next? Because you're panicking. You're not going to make good decisions. So it's really, really important to have a plan in place before that any of these types of things happen so that when they do, you have a playbook and you're making informed, educated decisions. These guys were able to get a hold of us pretty quickly, and it definitely saved them a lot of downtime and lost revenue. But then I'll kick it over to Adam on the insurance side because there's definitely some interesting insurance layers to this job.
Definitely. Yes, this is a little bit of a complicated one, but I'll just say limits are very important in keeping everything up to date. So when you look at a loss, essentially a insurance policy is meant to make you whole to the point right before the loss happened. So 5 minutes before this building flooded, what was it like? And how do we get you back to that same state? It won't make you any better off or worse off. They're not going to pay extra money to do updates to get newer equipment, anything like that. It's exactly as it was before. But one thing Aaron brought up was ordinance or law. So if you have all of this flooding, everything happens. It might be obviously there's a lot of electrical here. Depending on when this was built out, the electrical as well as the building, if there's new codes that might not make it relevant or safe to put it back to what it was before the loss, you can get an ordinance or law coverage, meaning on top of the coverage you have to bring it back to what it was moments before the loss. If you need to do code updates to get the electrical, to get anything up to date to pass essentially an inspection, you'll have extra coverage on top of that. A lot of policies now might include it or it'll be a throw-in, but make sure that you do have that on any policy. It's a pretty low ticket item and it's definitely obviously worth having. And the other thing I wanted to mention was when you have, a flood like this and you have, essentially a full loss of anything in that room because it's soaked through, having kind of a detailed list of what you have for both inventory, both refrigerated, not refrigerated, equipment, furniture, tools, and then actual building cost is very important. If you have, first of all, spoilage or any inventory, depending on what it is that day or in that average season, they're going to pay you back for that. Where we see this a lot is say you might be approaching the holidays. I know this is just right after. If typically you have maybe $500,000 of inventory, but right before Christmas you have $1.5 million and you don't let your insurance company know, and a week before Christmas you lose all of that, you won't get coverage for the extra million unless you put it on your policy or have a seasonal policy. So really important to kind of let your insurance agent know seasonality of business. And then again, just really keeping separate what does a building cost and what's built in, and then what's your equipment and inventory is really important to have the limits right and to make sure you get paid out because that's no one wants to pay for insurance and not get paid out when something does happen.
Absolutely. And then my third case study and last one. This is Next Gen Daycare in Westford. They've had multiple floods in the basement there. This is actually me in person doing one of our emergency ready profiles. So they've had multiple floods. So they have two sump pumps in their basement, and they have this Generac backup in case the power goes out. It can still run the sump pumps. So somehow, some way, one of the storms this winter, I don't know if it was the December or January one, their power did go out, but their backup generator did not kick on. Go figure, right? They did everything they were supposed to, but it still didn't work, and it was of no fault of their own. It's just faulty equipment failure, which happens. But I do applaud them for putting in that Generac backup generator. If you don't have a generator and power is vital to your business, I would highly encourage you to look into it, especially in New England. And then the other sort of funny thing is on the right here is all their IT. So when I do an emergency ready profile, I ask where is your IT infrastructure because if there's a flood or a fire, I'll try to save that first because that's usually critical to a lot of businesses. And you can see at the bottom of the picture on the right here, there's what's called a flood cut. And that's standard when walls get wet, water wicks up. So what we do is cut 2 feet in general around the wall to make sure it can air out. We can get behind it. So this is called the flood cut, and they've hung all of their IT infrastructure right above it because they've been flooded so many times. They knew this is where we have to put our IT equipment up to because that's where SERVPRO is going to cut the wall. So I feel for them. They're doing everything in their power to be prepared, and I applaud them for hanging this IT equipment, for getting this generator, for having the sun pumps. But ultimately, you just never know. Mother Nature combined with equipment failure won on this one. But thankfully, they're prepared. They've situated the basement in a way that if it does flood, it's not going to cause catastrophic damage. They may want to look into some other preventative things, but that's for another webinar. But yeah, Adam, do you want to speak to the insurance side on this one?
Not too much here, but I will say when carriers do come out and do inspections, they love to see things off the ground, especially on the first floor. Obviously, things that can also electrocute you, cause fires, anything like that. So they did a good job here. Obviously, you have, low-hanging wire, which could get into the water if it does flood or cause any problems. So just kind of tidying it up and making sure that it's up to code before they do an inspection is definitely huge, because they might cause problems, even non-renew or cancel a policy if they see something that isn't, what they expected or up to code. So just being proactive with your agent, asking questions. We're happy to come out and kind of take a look at a property beforehand, and just make sure that what you're doing is safe.
Perfect. So now on the SERVPRO side, what can you do about all this, right? I mean, the general idea is think about the things that could happen ahead of time, make a plan if those things do happen, so that in the moment you're making good, informed decisions, and that you get to work right away, so that your business interruption and loss of revenue is shortened as much as possible. And then obviously on the insurance side, making sure your coverages cover that gap. So this is an interesting statistic that up to 50% of businesses close down following a disaster, according to the latest research. Of the businesses that survived, the overwhelming majority of them had a preparedness plan in place. Pre-planning can serve as an insurance policy aimed at peace of mind, and knowing that you're ready for whatever happens speaks trust to your clients and employees that in the event your business is affected by disaster, they don't necessarily have to be. So again, it's a mindset, which is really hard for people to get into unless they're facing a disaster in the moment. A lot of my job is trying to talk about these things before they happen. But once I show examples, kind of like I did today, and talk about real life scenarios, it kind of clicks. And then the gears start turning, like, oh, what if this happened in my business? What would that mean? How can I get ahead of it? So that is my main focus for today and my main takeaway for you all. And also that ServPro does offer emergency ready profiles. So I will come out to any business and create an emergency plan for your building. I will compile, where is your water shut off? Where is your electric shut off? Where is your gas shut off? We will compile all of the relevant emergency contacts. So in an emergency, we're not playing phone tag. I'm not saying who's your plumber, who's your insurance carrier, who's this, who's that. I have it all. You have it all. Your employees can have it, your tenants can have it, whoever. But basically, there's a playbook for your building in the case of an emergency, and I will provide that service at no cost to any commercial property. It's free. I'll come out, I'll do it. We have software, we have apps. So it would be silly not to take advantage of that. Just in case something happens, you have a little bit of a plan, and then I keep that plan on file at my office so that my team also understands your property, your needs, and who we need to talk to so we can get to work immediately.
And just to go off what Aaron said for a minute, I mean, him and his team are so crucial. As an insurance, service provider, we like to be proactive beforehand, get all the coverages in place, and then after a loss does happen, we want to make sure things are covered, paid for, and get back to normal. However, in the moment when it's 2 o'clock in the morning and your basement's flooded or there's a fire, there's something crazy happening, we'll definitely come out and try to help. But people like Aaron, people like the, fire department, all that are really just so crucial in the moment. So having them on speed dial and really being prepared before, so damage is minimized and really your stress is minimized, is huge. So I can't say enough about them, Aaron and the whole team. They really are crucial pieces to this whole thing.
Thanks.
Of course. But yeah, back to the super fun insurance coverages. So just a couple of things I talked about during the presentation. I know it was kind of just, going off what Aaron was saying, but updating everything annually, it's not the most fun, but it takes an hour or two every year, and it's really crucial. Making sure your building coverage is up to date. The last thing you want to do is be paying for a policy that's $500,000 off what your building's worth. You have a full loss and you're out on $500,000. It's not a fun thing. Same thing with business personal property, income and payroll for the company. So you aren't losing out on dollars if you are in a business for a couple of days, a couple of months. Making sure you're up, really covered properly is huge there. And also just for a minute on seasonal businesses, you can write that into a policy where for restaurants, for retail, if you have certain times where inventory is higher, just costs in general are higher, you can write that in. So in, July and August as a restaurant, when you're doing double the business, you'll be paid out appropriately if you do have a loss. Extra expense, if your business has to go elsewhere and you have to find another place to do business, they'll pay for it. And obviously just loss of business, I keep harping on. Another thing to take into account, I know it's more specific, but if you have high value equipment or inventory where it's not something you can go out in a few days or even a week and replace, it might take 6 months to get a piece of equipment to build what you sell. It might take, a year to get a new coffee maker built to do exactly what you want. You can write that in to either expedite the process to pay for getting something quicker or for something that will do the job as closely as possible to what you were doing before. So you can get really creative these days. It's all about just working with your agent and just seeing what the possibilities are and then what you want to take on for a cost for the insurance. And the last thing is just ordinance or law. Essentially covers the cost of upgrading a building after a loss to the current codes. Essentially, what that means is if you have this coverage in place, you have $1 million of coverage on your building, it burns to the ground, and it's going to cost 1.1 million to build back up to code. You're going to get extra coverage from that policy in order to build up to what you need to now, as opposed to essentially making you whole to the minute before the loss, because that won't obviously be legal for you. So super important to look at. And again, if anyone has questions about their policies in place, we're happy to do a review and give our best advice.
Perfect. With that, I'll leave our contact info up for a minute. If anyone wants to take it down, I'll offer a free emergency ready plan. And Adam's also offering a free insurance review if you guys have any questions about those things. I want to thank you all for joining us and sharing your time with us. And thanks for the chamber for the opportunity. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. If anyone has questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you, everybody.
The only curiosity I have is for remote workers or sole proprietors who might use their house for a business. Do you have any special guidance on if something happens to their house and they have equipment there, or like on the insurance side for those people?
Yeah, so if you're a sole proprietor and the only office you have is your home, you can write a policy out to cover, essentially you can do like square footage of your home. If you have, for me, I'm working at my house, I have probably 400 square feet of office space. So you can write that in and cover certain business personal property, we call it. So anything used to go towards your business, your data, your computer, that can all be covered and it will be separate than your homeowner's policy. And you have to write it a different way, but it's definitely pretty simple to do.
Yeah, pretty common now, I'd imagine.
Extremely.
Great. Anybody else have any questions for myself or Adam? Anything specific about your business maybe you were wondering that we didn't cover?
I'm
All right.
just thinking about in a water event. Let's say that you have on your walls waterproof material. Do you take that out as well when you do your cleanup?
Can you give me a little bit more detail on what the waterproof material is and on what wall?
Well, it's AZEK type material.
Well, in general, I'm not exactly sure what that is. In general,
It's
something's
it's a plastic in lieu of say a normal plaster wall. You can put up this AZEK, which is a plastic, it's like maybe a half-inch thick material, and it's waterproof.
cool. Yeah, I mean, in general, if something's non-porous and it doesn't absorb moisture, then we can dry it in place, right?
So you wouldn't take it down.
No, we wouldn't need to if it doesn't absorb water. If it's porous and does absorb water in any way, then that's where you got to start either removing it or figuring out how to dry it in place. So I'd say what you have is a great solution.
Okay.
Where do you have that in your home out of curiosity?
No, I'm involved with the Knights of Columbus in Needham, and we had a invasion last year, and so part of the process we put in place to rehab the hall is using that AZAC type material.
Oh, I love that. So there you go. You're planning. You did react to a loss, but now you're planning for a future one. So well on you. That sounds like a great plan. Good move.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question, Paul.
So if there's no other questions, I'll put the contact information in the follow-up email for everyone to follow up. But thank you so much, Aaron and Adam, for sharing your insight with us. And thank you for everyone for attending, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Thank you.